All right, 40K enthusiasts, we are continuing list building. This idea of exploring various models, looking at a template where you can take your army, you can take the models in your collection and utilize them in a certain way. I've shared with you up in the archives on my YouTube channel, off the main page there are links which are going to take you to the discussions of previous podcasts looking at list building. We explored my Berserkers of Scalathrax, this idea of cornate glory, taking all of your model resources and leveraging them to get into the assault, to have critical mass, to hit in waves, to keep your opponent locked down so they can't run away. We explored Necrons. We explored Samhan, Eldar, this idea of maximum speed, of wolf packing, where you're going to take your army, move very quickly, gang up on units that are weak, and in theory, get out of there, rinse and repeat every single turn. And now I want to look at kind of a generalist type list. And what I mean by that, a list where you're not necessarily focusing on one area. These other examples and many of the armies that I like to play, I have an idea in my head. I have a theme, and I'm working on a new Harlequin list, and I'm going to push that up soon, where I want to do something cool on the table, right? In my mind, I want to run across the table. You can have your fancy toys and your tech and your tactics and all your free stuff and whatever you're going to have, and I'm going to put you to the bolt pistol and the chainsword. And that excites me, and I build a list to do that. A generalist list is, I don't really have a plan. I'm going to take a variety of units. There is a checklist. It's not just taking models and throwing it down on the table, but I'm going to take my model collection, and I find sometimes it helps to kind of lay it, literally physically lay it all out in front, and I'll cut out or I'll write on a piece of paper these different elements we're going to look at, put them in front of me, and literally take the models and break up my army with what they're going to do, or say to myself, okay, these are the resources I have to spend, the points, and put them on there and build a list from that. But I tend to be very visual. That's, of course, why I enjoy playing war games versus just like a hex map game with counters. So an all-takers list, an all-comers type list is where you are going to have, it's focused, but you're going to have a little bit of everything. And at the start of the game, as your opponent is pulling out their models and you're getting ready to set up, you're going to look and say, what element are they lacking that you have? That is what you're going to exploit. That is what you're going to exploit. So we're going to kind of keep that in mind as we look at the various pieces of this. So the first piece, that first piece of paper, what is, and I'm just using my terminology. You're going to replace this with your own thought process to kind of sync up what you're doing with your own lists and everything. But what is your blob unit? What is your unit that is big, that is massive, that can take a lot of damage? And when I say take a lot of damage, take a lot of wounds, it could be something that's really tough, high toughness, multiple wounds, multiple saves, ways of negating wounds. Or it could just be, look, I've got like 80 conscripts, or I've got massive amounts of cultists. Something that on the spectrum, either way, a lot of models or little models, can just soak up lots and lots and lots of dice from your opponent. This group, it's going to be a couple of units, so this group is going to push to the center of the table. You're going to look to shut down the center of the table. And the reason why this is important in an all-comers list in 40K, and in 40K in general, is we're dealing with the physical limitations of the gaming table. Except in very, very rare circumstances, you can't leave the table. You can't go off to the left side or the right side. You have your deployment zone. You are playing on that table. So if I take something big, imagine I take this big round circle. It's impassable terrain. It's a mountain. And I put it in the center of the table. Well, now that limits the avenue of approach. You can either go left or you can go right around it. And if you go left or right, that's going to compress whatever units that go by there onto the side of the table. Shutting down the center of the table is going to mess with your opponent's mobility. It's going to mess with the delivery system of whatever their tactics are. And it's going to force them, if they want to make it into your deployment zone, which might be important for some mission parameters depending on what you're playing, it's going to bring all of their units, it's going to funnel them in. It's going to bring them into range sooner. It's going to allow them to make it a little bit challenging to coordinate. Now you're saying, well, Fritz, doesn't it work both ways? Well, your unit in the center of the table, when the time is right, that unit can step aside, or that unit can move a little bit to the left or to the right, and by unit it could be multiple units, can move to the left or to the right to open up an avenue of approach on there. Having something to shut down the center of the table is key. The next piece is some sort of expendable Death Star unit, some sort of attacking type unit. Now the challenge in this, we're looking at this checklist, you're never going to be able to have the best of the best of the best. If we look at my Death Star units, my units in my Berserkers of Scalathrax list, there's no way you're going to be able to compete with that, because I'm taking a third of my army and throwing it into this wave 1 really quick. Wave 1 goes out and explodes in your deployment zone and tries to cause as much damage as possible to keep you busy. Wave 2 are lots and lots of Cornate Berserkers that are going to go in and finish you off once I've created that chaos, pun intended. Wave 3 looks to see, what can I take advantage of? Where are you? What are you trying to counter? And kind of go off and do that. There's a couple of mini waves in there, but this idea of waves in my Berserker Scalathrax list, you're never going to be able to compete with my Wave 1 Death Star. But there's other things that you're going to exploit if you're using your all takers list on there. So this Death Star is going to go out and try to cause as many problems as possible. You know, you're going to pick a unit, you're going to send it in there, you're going to force your opponent to deal with it. It needs to be potent. It needs to be a little bit scary, but you got to look out for the points. A recent amazing Death Star unit that I saw, a good example, real life example, playing against orcs, just a bunch of Death Company, some really pissed off Blood Angel Death Company, just, you know, running across the table. You're going to lose the unit, but it's going to keep your opponent busy, and it's going to try to inflict some damage. You're looking to keep them busy for as many turns as you can, 1, 2, or 3 turns. Something that is going to go out and stop your opponent. So what we have right now, we're looking to shut down our opponent's ability, right? This is kind of the matrix here of this. We're looking to shut down their ability to move and to react for 1 or 2, maybe 3 turns, but 1 or 2 turns. That's important, because you are automatically taking the momentum of the game. You are preventing them from moving out of their deployment zone, because remember, 40K is a finite game. And the armies in regular 40K, as opposed to, say, something like Kill Team or a Skirmish, they need to move out, right? Turn 1, you need to start pushing out. You need to start getting some ground. You need to start being a little bit aggressive with your movement. You're not doing that if you're locked down. You're not doing that if the table is cut in half and there's this giant blob unit there and you're trading shots back and forth. So by turn 1, turn 2, turn 3, you've stunted your opponent's ability to move out. An outflanking, a side riding type unit. Something that is going to work the left or the right side of the table, be really, really fast. Space Marine bikes, the best example. These outflankers, these side table movement units, I'm looking for a good word to describe it. They might run up the side of the table if your opponent is weak. So let's say they're castling up on terrain and they're trying to take advantage of some terrain features. You've sent in your Death Star. You've kind of captured the center of the table there. And now on the right side of the table, there's really a space that you can move up fast 1 turn. Turn 2, cut across your opponent's deployment zone and really be in the backside of their army. You're going to do that. You're going to want to do that. Likewise, they could be pushing forward and say there's the right side of the table and the left side of the table, right? Because you've got that blob unit in the middle, and they're trying to push forward. You could send those outflankers, you could send those fast moving units right up and stop them instantly, and now totally bottleneck on that. But you're going to want something that moves to the left or to the right. Next piece, a skirmish unit. So a skirmish unit is just something that small amount of points as possible, of course adjusted by what you're playing, and it's going to operate in the midfield to the mid-band of the table. If we think about our gaming table, I divide it up into 3 bands, visual bands. Where you deploy your army is your deployment zone, where I deploy my army is my deployment zone, and then there's this center band on there. The center band is important because that's the crossover point into your opponent's deployment zone, or if you need to kind of pull back some units based on the mission or based on what's going on, being in the center means you have a place to go. This is why shutting down the center is so important. If you take your army and you put it in the center of the table, center-ish in the table, you can radiate out like a chaos star in all the directions. If you're in your deployment zone, you can only move forward. If you're in your opponent's deployment zone, that's the best because you're there and you can move back. So we want some sort of skirmish unit. I'll usually use Eldar Rangers. My Hawk Lords, I'll use a small group of scouts. The key is to spend minimal points on this one unit. And this one unit is going to look to start, or it's going to look to operate in the mid-band of the table. And it's just going to look for opportunities. Maybe that's just a mission objective it can camp on and just cause your opponent to pull off some resources, and then as it pulls off resources, I may engage or I may run away. It may take opportunistic shots, because remember, being in the middle band of the table means your opponent is going to pass by with certain units. And with those certain units, you're going to fire on them, and you'll just reduce the units. Maybe you'll get lucky. It's the type of unit in 40K where I'm looking to get lucky with it. You know, my snipers make a couple of good hits, or my scouts cause some wounds and now bring a unit down by a couple of models, so I've reduced the dice just enough so they're not as effective. They're not game changers, but they're kind of a little unit in this total chaotic game, and I'm looking, what can I do? Where can I react? The final pieces are answers. Not the best answer, but something to deal with it. What are you going to have in your list that's anti-infantry? Meaning if I take all my cultists, my Berserkers of Scalathrax list, can you chew through 40 to 60 cultists in a turn? Maybe you can. I mean, a lot of armies can in 40K. I think I actually have to bump up the number of cultists, but I got to see where I'm going to draw from other units and what I'm going to do. But some sort of anti-infantry. Do you have some sort of anti-tank, meaning you can deal high volume, high strength multi-wounds and really start busting vehicles? Do you have a unit that can do that? Do you have anti-air, something that's going to be able to take out that? Do you have what I call the anti-big boys, right? Anti-monsters creatures, or anti-characters that you just got to punk immediately. What in your list do you have that is going to deal with that? So that if your opponent moves, you can move and you can counter with it. So at this point, either in our mind or physically, we have everything laid out. And you have an answer. Now, I say it's not the best answer because your resources and your models are limited. The thing with a focus list like my Berserkers of Scalathrax, I've poured all my resources into the Cornate Assault. If I don't pull it off, I'm toast. I'm done. You know, I'm going to get just destroyed. And I realize that there are certain armies that I fight where before we even get to layering the mission on, it's going to be a tough fight. It is, but I have fun playing that narrative list. An all-takers type list, you have a lot more flexibility. Yet at the same time, you need to make sure all of these bases are covered because, again, when your opponent is pulling out their models, you're going to look and say, okay, they've got a lot of infantry. Okay, here's my answer to that. And mentally, you know, you're pushing that model, that unit, that group, that element forward. Okay, anti-monsters creature, I've got that covered. Looking at psychic support or anti-psychics, I've got that. You know, all the major elements in 40K. Then you're going to look and say, well, look, they actually, for an assault unit, you know, anti-assault or an assault-based unit, you're going to look and say they don't really have a counter for it. So you're going to look and see what do they not have a counter for based in their list. That is what you're going to leverage. That's what you're going to protect. So in this an imaginary example, if you're looking and saying, okay, they don't really have a way, you know, it's like some sort of decked out gun line, not really much mobility here. They don't have a way to really stop the assault. So the assault elements in my all-takers list, that's going to be massive. Then you are going to look to protect those. You are going to look to use your other elements to get those assault elements into position. I know I'm obsessed with the assault. And then that's what you're going to use against your opponent on there. If they are a very, very fast list, then you're going to use the elements of shutting down the center of the table You might have to throw on some other models to move up, shut down the center of the table. Now those fast elements, you can be as fast as you want. I've locked you down into your deployment zone band. You're going to look and see, out of the elements in your army, what can they not match and what are they weak on. That's this idea of an all-takers, an all-comers, a generalist type list, and building out your 40K army, again, independent of army, independent of the type of missions that you play. This is kind of a holistic approach in looking to leverage your 40K assets, your 40K models, but most important, by plug and playing in the units to fulfill these roles, you're looking at playing what you want to play.